Daddy, we're doing.
I'm doing a podcast, Dizzy. Hello and welcome to the Too Cool for School podcast. I'm your host, Yannick, and on today's episode, I've got two very special guests with me, the founders of Black Men Teach, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves.
Afternoon, guys. So I'm Albert Adeyemi. I'm a secondary school PE and maths teacher, head of year, moving into senior leadership, and one of the co-founders of Black Men Teach.
Great stuff.
I'm Janoy. I'm also a secondary school teacher, also a member of SLT, and I specialise in RE and citizenship.
Yeah, that's great stuff. So before we get into it, you know, it's amazing to see, you know, black men, especially within the field of education. And, you know, I remember growing up and, you know, it's one of those questions like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And rarely did anyone, you know, of our community say they wanted to be like a teacher or an educator. So, you know, just out of curiosity, like what led you both into this field?
For me, it was football coaching. So in sixth form, I started football coaching in my area. We started a football club, and that just grew my passion working with young people, young boys from my estate. And I was like, how can I do this sort of longer term? So PE teaching, and then I always had an interest for maths. So that's where it came. So through sport and just working with young people, and then it just came naturally into teaching.
Cool. And how about yourself, Jonah?
For me, it was more so, I was at university. From first year right up until the end, I used to do summer jobs with NCS The Challenge, working with young people. And then as I was coming to the end of my degree, I was like, what is it that I want to kind of do? And then teaching, because I like working with young people, teaching was the next viable option. But I think the route into it and just cementing the thought that I wanted to be a teacher, it didn't come naturally. So I really had to kind of convince myself, do I really want to do this? Especially there was nobody immediately around me who was doing teaching.
That's great. So you shared a bit about, you know, your own sort of personal journeys, but how did you guys sort of link up? Like how did Black Men Teach, you know, come about? Like, what is it, a Jay-Z Dame situation? Like what's going on?
You go.
Alright, cool. So it was back in the days when like there's something that's EduTwitter. Basically, a lot of educators just on Twitter, and they're really, really active. And I was following Albert, and I know that he was doing some amazing things when it came to mentoring in his own school. And then I also wanted to kind of do something kind of similar in mine. And so we kind of connected on that level. Then there was a campaign that was going on about trying to raise the profile of black male teachers in the UK. And this came after the murder of George Floyd. And so it was a virtual campaign. Albert brought me in, and then we've just been going ever since then. It was just, and the message of the campaign was ultimately a case of, you know, if you respect me as a black man, you should. So if you respect me as your child's teacher, you should respect me as a black man as well. And it raised a lot of viewership, a lot of comments, and then it led us to start Black Men Teach organically. We didn't force it, but I think one thing that a silent agreement was that we needed more of us, and then that kind of just formed organically over like 6-7 months. And then we put on our first event. Don't know what it is that we're looking to do. And then, 4 or 5 years down the line, we're here now. So
that's amazing. So Black Men Teach is going on for how many years?
Bro, I was getting my dates mixed up.
Yeah, so it's this. We're in our 5th year. So we celebrated our 4th birthday in November last year, November 2025. So we're in our 5th year.
That's amazing. And you know, outside of this, like there's been so many people within the sort of field of education within our space who have spoken, you know, so highly about the work that, you know, you both do and the impact that you've made, not just in the professional spaces, but the impact that you've made with young people. And I think for me, it's always important to know, like for you guys, growing up, like who were your sort of role models? Like who did you look up to? Who made that impact that essentially contributed to you both being, you know, the men that you are now?
I think, you know, aside from my sort of my family and sort of my mum and my sister, like thinking about the education space and my school experience, I distinctly remember, I was thinking about the question like really hard before we got here. I distinctly remember sort of 3 educators or 3 people in my school experience. So there was one, my maths teacher, Mr. Ayola. He was a force to be reckoned with, like in terms of maths, and like he didn't accept anything less than sort of the best of my ability, and that's what sort of grew my passion in maths and grew sort of my want to support students to you know, develop their math skills even if they felt like they wasn't able. So he's one person. My head of sixth form back in secondary school, Mrs. Fox, she pushed me to apply for this grant that got me started with coaching. So that sort of that began my whole trajectory into teaching through my coaching. And she pushed me to apply for this grant, which was the Mark Everson Foundation, and they do some great work supplying money to young people to start projects in their areas. And I got £500, got qualified as a level 1 coach, and that was the beginning of coaching and starting my football club and that journey into teaching. And then just one more teacher is Mr. guy called Mr. Bromfield. And like at the time it was quite cringy, but he would always say to us, like, he's got 2 daughters and he's got 500 sons. And I went to an all boys school and there's about 500 of us, and that at the time it was like a bit cringy, but looking back, and the standard and expectation and the level of care that he showed whilst he was there, and it meant a lot, and it showed sort of the kind of influence and impact he wanted to have on us as boys in that community. So those are 3 significant sort of adults in the education space that have definitely sort of left a mark on me and made a sort of a difference and inspired me in the education space.
That's great. And how about yourself, Janae?
So kind of similar in sense I went to an all-boys school. There were 3 teachers, 2 of which were female, one was a male. So I was born in Jamaica and I came here and I was 7, so I was in year 3. So I had 3 years primary school, and then I started the process of secondary school. And I remember in year 7, there was a maths teacher, Miss Down, I believe her name, can't remember, and Miss Smith. They were both like Jamaicans, like strong accents. And because they knew I was Jamaican as well, that expectation was there from the beginning. And so I found myself, you know, working my way up into top set. They really fought for me, so on and so forth, which is interesting because I was listening to almost like this a similar podcast, but this professor of Clark Atlanta University, all right, he was talking about, you know, the prominence of HBCUs, and it's this whole idea that, you know, for a young black girl or a young black boy, when they go to university, because the professors are like them, of that, you know, even of a higher caliber and so on and so forth, you already come to university with that expectation that you're great, as opposed to the fact of you're fighting to prove yourself. And I think with teachers, like what Albus mentioned, also what I've mentioned, especially those from Jamaica, is that they already had that expectation that I was great, and it was more so just a case of me becoming aware of it. And I think their connection with myself is something that I still remember. And my first teaching job, Miss Smith, you know, we both worked at the same school, and I still look the same. So as soon as she saw me, she was like, "Rotted, I'm getting old," and everything along those lines. But she literally, you know, saw the end product of the investment that she did in year 7, and she was super proud. And the last one was, his name is Mr. Sylvester, and he was a MFL teacher. But the way he carried himself, like, I like suits, innit? Like I like wearing suits, and he was the first teacher that just rocked it, you know, at high caliber. He was just competent and excellent at his job. And then he's somebody that looks up until today.
That's amazing. And I think it's good it's very telling to hear the impact that, you know, those teachers, those educators had on you both. growing up, and a term that I hear a lot, especially across the education sphere, is like, how do we champion our young people? How do we champion our students? And I can hear from what you both shared that essentially, those educators, those teachers, were your champions. And you shared a bit when you was sort of given like descriptions of the impact that those teachers had on you both. And I think it will be good to hear from you both in regards to like what criteria or what description would you give an educator or a teacher who really stands out as a champion? Like what are they doing that's different? Miss Smith and the other educators, because like you were able to list 3 teachers out of how many teachers you would have had across a near 15-year span if we're talking about primary school to sixth form, but those 3 stood out. So when you think about those characteristics, what is it that makes a student, or what is it that makes a teacher a real champion for their students?
I think one of the key things is high expectations. So that expecting more, regardless of what the child thinks they can do, or what the child thinks their limitations are. It's that expecting more, and then with that expecting more, because it's easy to set high expectations, but if the child doesn't believe it, how can they sort of get there and reach those expectations? And so with those high expectations, it's support and care and nurture, and just being in their corner, like just that advocate for them in regardless. So even if they've messed up, even if they've got things wrong, it's the bar's here, you may be down here at the moment, but we're going to support you, we're going to help you to get there, and it's helping them move beyond whatever barriers they've set in their minds, set from their environment, whatever barriers that there may be. It's just maintaining that you can achieve so much more, and we're going to help you get there, is what I think.
I think just one thing to add, or to build onto that one, is if we're asking teachers to be like champions or what we stood out, we're kind of just asking them to meet the young person where they're at. And what that looks like can vary for so many different young people. And so it's important that, your connection, your relationship is quite unique and individual, because you're focusing on where they currently are. So I was an immigrant. I came from a single parent household. Free school meals, pupil premium. A lot of my teachers who truly championed me was aware of my story, but then they still had this narrative of, despite that, this is what you can kind of become. And I think that's a key point right there.
I think also just to add is what that looks like from the teacher's perspective can also vary. So like the teachers that I've mentioned and like the teachers that I work with now, everyone's got their own sort of style and their way of engaging with students, and what one teacher does may not look like what another teacher does, but if it has the same sort of purpose and the same aim and the same sort of characteristics that we've mentioned, it has the same impact in a sense. So how the teacher sort of so my maths teacher, he was very sort of like hard and disciplined, and like it was very traditional in the way he taught. And then sort of my head of sixth form, it was more sort of nurturing and caring, and so but it's different approaches, but both had a massive impact. Yeah.
And speaking of impact, I'm keen to hear both your thoughts in terms of this idea of like mentorship and the environment that students sort of grow up and are cultivated in. And it'll be good to know like which one do you think is more powerful? like individual mentorship, the presence of, you know, an individual educator or teacher who's an advocate, or just, you know, being like in the right, you know, in environment. And, you know, just to give an example, like, do you think you could take a kid from anywhere, whether it's Brixton, Peckham, Hackney, Barking and Dagenham, whatever, pluck them into Brampton Academy or Mossbourne Academy? Are they going to succeed just because of the environment that they're in? Or do you need to have that individual, you know, mentorship and those teachers who are being very intentional, you know, to sort of cultivate something within you?
I think I have an answer for that, but
I'll let you go.
Once upon a time, I thought it relied heavily on like the teacher going above and beyond, and almost being that link. But I think that notion almost places a bit of pressure on, number one, the teacher to always be there, and you know, this is now like my 5th or 6th school I've worked at, and there's definitely been kids I've had to leave to move on to the next. And the first time I left, that really broke me, so much so that I said I'll never really attach myself to that level where I could just stay at a school. But then the flip side, I do feel like if the environment allows for that collective support, it's much greater. So one of the things that we do with at BMT for our mentorship program is that we focus heavily on the group, the collective, because the legacy piece is going to be the group. We're only in schools for a period of time, maybe half a term or a term. But if we invest a lot of effort into the group, we know that when the mentor, which is a member of the BMT team, leaves, because we've cultivated a group, they could continue to support each other. And so I guess to answer your question, I do feel like if the environment is set up right, that student from South London, Brixton, whatever, going to a top school, they could thrive as long as the collective group is holding them to account, despite them having a individual. But in an ideal world, I think both is great.
Yeah. So?
Yeah, I'm not in complete agreement with Janoy. I think mentorship allows you to thrive in any environment. I feel allows you creates that support system to thrive in any environment. So the example that you gave, if you pluck a child from anywhere and put them into this top school, that's not just going to work just because of the environment of the school. You have to almost help the child, teach the child, support the child to understand what it takes to thrive in that school, whether it's systems or it's routines, because I think that's how you get students that sort of almost rebel against whatever systems they may have in place in that top school. That it may be a work ethic that they're not familiar with, and just that in itself can create friction. But with mentorship, it might support that. I think the example that sort of paints a picture for me the most is, I used to do a lot of mentorship, and my focus area was Year 8 boys. And with that, I've seen 2 or 3 cohorts, and now they've left secondary school and sort of they're older, either at college or moving on to university for some. And I've seen how for some that the impact of that mentorship has sort of transformed the trajectory of their lives. However, for others, as soon as the mentorship finished, their environment is sort of just that's taken over. The environment had a great impact because of the environment that they're from. And for some, that's meant they're in prison. They're like the stuff that they learned in that mentorship, because it wasn't long term. And we speak about it at BMT and sort of work that we would do with young people and their families is longevity is what creates the difference. I think mentorship is a crucial part. I think environment is important, and I think mentorship adds to that into that environment, that culture that's being created. So I think mentorship definitely is a big part in people thriving in their environment.
Yeah, that's interesting. Good, both interesting viewpoints. I feel, for me, just leaning on my own experience as an educator, thinking about the school that I used to work at, I feel that in terms of my role and being ahead a year across the 5 years, that I would say it was more the individual than the actual environment of the school. Not that there was anything, particularly wrong with the school, but I guess being able to look back in hindsight as well as during my time there, really allowed me to see the impact of like the individual work that I was doing with the students, and just like the point that you were making, I think the individual work and what we was cultivating in the students meant that, okay, we're pushing you to thrive here, but we're also pushing you to build something within you that wherever you go, you can thrive, irrespective of, the environment. And again, I haven't worked and been inside establishments like Brampton Manor and the Mossbournes, etc. But I wonder how those students would fare when they leave that environment that they're used to, because it's very structured, it's very set in their ways. But I guess the mindset of the students going in there is, this is expressed to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and blah blah blah, and this is and those schools, I guess, become like a microcosm. Is that the word? Yeah, of what is going to happen, or what life is going to be, for them, in the future, I guess. And I know earlier you were speaking about the impact that your teachers had on you in terms of really understanding the things that made you, your identity, where you came from, coming from single parent household, etc. Do you feel, and again, this is a question for both, but do you feel that educators who have lived experience or the similar lived experience as the students that we're working with, that gives us an edge and allows us to have a better or bigger impact on their lives?
I think so. To some extent, it gives you, just a level of understanding of that child's experience, and it may not be exactly the same. But it gives you. You understand the bigger picture of that child, their background, what some of their challenges may be. But I don't think that's solely. I don't think you have to have lived experience to show compassion or want to understand or want to learn. I think there's some teachers that I can think of that don't necessarily have lived experience, in the most challenging circumstances, but they care enough to hear the child and listen to the child and sort of understand their experience and not let that because sometimes understanding or having an idea of a child's experience, it can sort of lead to bias and how you interact with that child negatively, but they don't necessarily let that happen. It just tailors how they teach, tailors how they speak and engage with that child to fully show that they know, they understand, they care, and if they don't fully understand, they're willing to listen and learn.
Yeah.
I definitely think having a lived experience gives you an advantage. And I agree with what you were saying, that the advantages can be great, but I don't think it limits your your accessibility to work with certain kids if you're from different backgrounds. I think one thing that I've really stood out to myself is that there's a study that found that cross-generational conversations is a lot positive. And whenever I deliver certain CPDs on behalf of BMT to teachers, one of the first things that we do to really bridge conversations between black boys is almost for them to identify key pinch points in their own journey that they could use to kind of connect. So it could be an aspect of like a role model. It could be an aspect of, your favorite food or something along those lines, or an area that you grew up in. And what's funny enough, there's one guy who was a white male, and he was talking about how, because he grew up in North London, and his role model growing up was this black footballer. I can't remember his name for the life of me, but he was really able to look up to him because he was such a kind of compassionate individual that came from his own area. And he's able to use that to really connect with a lot of young black boys who like football, who have similar role models and so on and so forth. And so I think if it was to kind of add to that point, I think lived experience is quite good, but it more so comes down to everybody has at least one or two things that you can use to really connect with a young person. We just need to kind of find it and then use that to our advantage.
I think just looking at it from a different perspective, it can become lazy if the expectation is like, for example, us as educators, black male educators, it can become lazy from a school perspective or a system perspective if the expectation is that because you're a black male educator, you should be able to understand and work with those group of students.
100%.
So it's just understanding that it's not just if you have lived experience, it's you can get to build relationships and build links and understand these children and young people if you make an effort to.
Yeah, you're right, and it becomes very lazy, and it's important that we don't get boxed into those behaviour management, pastoral type roles exclusively without really being able to show how we can contribute to other aspects of the school that will allow students to thrive. And I think that's definitely important. And speaking of impact, what roles, and we're having these discussions as men, like how important is like the father figure role in parenting, and when it comes to education. I know it's a conversation that many people have had, many people continue to have, and people will have differing views about it. And I can attest of growing up single parent household, and I would say that like I fared okay. Mum did as best as she could, and I guess it's one of those things where you can maybe look back and think, oh, do you know what, if there was a father figure involved, like how would that have looked like? Or what type of conversations would I have perhaps had with them that I wouldn't have necessarily had with mum, or whether in your particular role you've actually seen in person the difference between two parent households and how a child is brought up and a single parent household. So I know that's a loaded question around father figures and their role. So it would be good to get your thoughts on that.
Well, first and foremost, a massive shout out to the active father figures who they play a key role. I think it's really, really good. I'm gonna sidestep and then bring it back. One of my somebody who I've worked with, she was called into a meeting for her young person, for her child at another school. And one of the first thing I said to her was, like, because of the behaviour meeting and because things were getting quite interesting, whatever you do, don't go alone. Try to at least go with a male figure, her dad or somebody, because I think we both, all of us worked in schools where if you're coming for me, most times a lot of our meetings are with black mothers. And there is just that automatic stereotype that, okay, cool, it's probably from a single parent household. Mom doesn't really necessarily know what's going on and all this kind of things there. So I was able to tell her, look, whatever you do, just don't go by yourself. I feel like it's something quite important when there's a unified stance when you go into meetings, especially in schools, and you really come back to a lot of stereotype that people have of the black family. What I will say though is that I've come across some amazing examples of where it is a single parent household and the child has thrived and done well, as opposed to, you know, a household where there's both parents and the child hasn't done so well necessarily. I think it definitely comes down to this whole concept of parental engagement and also being involved, where as parents you understand that you are the third strand of an important cord in order for your child to be kind of successful. And I think as parents, we definitely need to kind of play that role better. Too often, especially in pastoral, when you're having meetings, we know the narrative already, and it's quite, from a deficit mindset or perspective, we ought to challenge it where possible, but sometimes the realities kind of speak volume itself, that maybe one parent is involved in their child's life, and then oftentimes that support isn't necessarily there that's needed for the child to kind of support or be supported. That's what I'll start with.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a couple of different. So whilst you're talking, I'm thinking about, there's just some of my own experience and just some of the work that I've done with young boys, both black and white and from various races, is just, I think, first and foremost, understanding what a positive father figure looks like. Because you know, there's, you know, single parent households, but then there's also two parent households where the father figure isn't necessarily present. So they have their dad in their life, but they can't necessarily go to them, or they don't necessarily have any sort of conversation with them. So it's understanding what a positive father figure looks like. And then I think also on the flip side, it's understanding the circumstances that could potentially cause a single parent household. So not everything is you know, the dad leaving or the dad just not being there. Sometimes it is that they've passed away, or so, you know, there's some unfortunate circumstances that can cause single parent households, and that creates this level of trauma and sort of for the child themselves as well, and there's challenge and difficulty with that. So I think definitely there is an importance to having positive male role models in a child's life, because it helps them sort of understand and picture what sort of this image and this idea of a man is like, or can be like. And I think especially in sort of today's society, where you've got so many images and so many sort of perspectives from the media and you know, of what a man should be, and not all of them are positive. We know a lot of them are sort of negative, and we see, you know, the all the stuff that's going on with, what is it? I can't remember what it's called, but like with masculinity and what a boy should grow up and be like, and how they should act. So it's definitely important to have positive male models. And I think just one example of that from my own experience is just helping young people understand their emotions. And for guys, I think that's probably one of the hardest things as a teenage boy growing up, and you want to be sort of this strong, you know, like whether it's macho, whatever it is, this idea of what you think a man should be like, but you've also got so much stuff that's happened in your life, and you've got these unresolved emotions, and not having the ability to sort of deal with that or process that. So I think one of the things, because I've been similar, in terms of I wouldn't necessarily say I wear my heart on my sleeve, but it's having the emotional intelligence to process things. But so supporting young people through that ability, and I think one of the sort of most profound situations that I was in is a young person was sort of battling themselves with whether they wanted to speak to a counsellor. Now they felt that they needed to, but this image around sort of counselling and mental health that was preventing them from doing it. And when they eventually took that step through support and through sort of mentoring, they've realised the impact that it's actually had and sort of how far it's brought them without sort of damaging their image or their sort of idea of what a man should be. So I definitely think positive male role models are important, and father figures are crucial, but it's understanding sort of the challenges within sort of, how, single parent households can be caused, and it's not just a monolithic sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think I'd like that. It's important for there to be like diversity in role models, and we know what the media, or I wouldn't even just blame the media, but we know the certain depiction when it comes to black men, certain routes that they kind of go down, either music or sports, and I think for us, obviously representing teaching as a profession, it's adding another lens that every single black person that we encounter either individually in our schools or through BMT, we know that we're kind of sowing a seed that this is a possibility, this is a viable option, and I think more of that needs to kind of take place, like that diversification when it comes to that role model figure when it comes to males.
Yeah, that's important. I think, just to touch upon your point, at first, that diversity is key, and I think we're seeing that. We're seeing that, we're seeing that a lot recently with. George, give an example, like George Imafidon, he does some great work around like engineering and aerospace and all of these things around like cars and whatever else. And then you've got that young brother who does all like the science stuff.
Man is science.
Yeah, and I'm just like, oh man, if we had this when I was in school, I would have been locked in, man. I would have got that C to a B, possibly. I don't even know. But they make, these things, exciting. They make learning exciting in a way that we can digest, in a way that, we can, understand it. And they're opening up, different pathways for us to be successful. And I think why diversity often, when it comes to role models has been difficult, it's not necessarily because we haven't been in those spaces, is that whether it's the media or the community hasn't portrayed us in those spaces as being successful. It's like, if you're black and you want to see success, then look at sprinting, look at football, look at music and whatever else. But there's so many other black people in various spaces who are successful, but they don't, they don't sort of expand on that. And going back to your point as well in regards to, the work around like emotions, and teaching young people to have that emotional regulation. It's so important because we see the impacts of that in adulthood. I've got so many friends, who I have conversations with now, and we can say, oh, you know what, look at X, Y, and Z, he's really struggling, or this happened with this person and whatever else. and luckily for me and, you know, my friendship groups, we're at that space now where we can have those conversations. We can be a bit more, you know, open with each other. And I think the importance of doing that work early on is it trains you so that when you're older and you're going through certain situations, like, you know how to, you know, essentially, or it gives you a better platform to know how to navigate it. Yeah. It's not do this when you're younger, so when you're older, like, everything's going to be perfect. But no, you're training yourself, you're building coping mechanisms, you're understanding, you know, your body when it's dysregulated. You know, do you sweat, do you clench your fist, do you just close off? Like, all of these things, it's about understanding yourself and having, you know, people who are coaching you to say, oh, you know, when you're like, this is like how you act and this is what you do, and like, how can you navigate, you know, these situations, and essentially just training them, because, you know, we didn't have that. Well, I didn't have that growing up, and it meant that anytime, you know, I came against an obstacle, like, boom, I'm just closing up. I'm cold. Like, that's it. Like, I ain't going out and no one's coming in. Like, everything's, you know, locked off. So that's definitely important.
So can I chime in for a second regarding that? I think so. There's roughly around 8 to 9 million Black or African Caribbean mixed heritage young people in the school system. And I think oftentimes, you know, and this is maybe a dig to a lot of my corporate friends or whatever, it's how many of us actually make ourselves available to kind of almost come back and give back to these young people in schools. And I think it's quite important that if you are an educator, you have friends, and or you know that your friends are teachers and they're reaching out to you to come and talk to people, talk to these young boys, talk to these young girls, like, do remember that once upon a time you was this person, and if you can kind of go back and almost teach that young, you know, person how to regulate, how to navigate certain situations, we'll find that certain cycles will be broken sooner, as opposed to them going into adulthood and then they're still kind of being confounded by their immature reactions to certain things and not having that maturity level. So definitely give back. Come back to schools, work with a young person, mentor them, all of those things like that, you know, so, yeah.
No, 100%, man. 100%, that's something that I would, you know, encourage, you know, to all of our, you know, young Black brothers out there to give back. I know early doors when you've just left the school and you're getting those alumni emails, you're like, nah, ban you, man. I don't want to hear, you know what I'm trying to say? But then 5-6 years down the line, you're just, you know, like, we're having a conversation now, oh, do you know what? Mrs. Skeleton wasn't really that bad, you know? And this person, you're realising those sort of Mr. Miyagi moments, you know, that they were having on you. And, you know, I've been back in and around, you know, the schools that I used to work at, like, many times again. Even little things like, I say it's little, but it's impactful. Even like having former students on the podcast. I went back last week to do like a shirt signing. So the year group who I left in year 7, which was my last year, they're year 11 now doing their GCSEs. So I came back on their last day shirt signing, whatever else, and I'm just like, damn, I ain't seen you guys, you know, in 5 years. And even hearing those students say, oh, like, sir, like, listen to your podcast and that, like, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, damn, like, 5 years on. And, you know, it's just amazing to be able to give back. I wanted to, so as we move on, you guys had an amazing event recently, which, you know, I was proud to sort of be a part of and be a speaker. And at your event, you spoke about transitions. And I wanted to touch on that very briefly, and ask you both, like, from your from both of your personal experiences, like, what period of transition do you feel like young black boys are most like vulnerable as they navigate through? Like, what period is the point where, you know what, if you're not on point, if you're not solid during this period, then like there's vulnerability, and that vulnerability could be around them, you know, falling into the criminal justice system. It could be falling out of education, just a period of vulnerability where they may lose themselves on this journey of life, essentially.
For me, I think there's a couple, but I think the most, I think one of the key pinch points for me is year 8, year 9. I think that's where they're sort of maturing, they're sort of growing up, they are you know, wanting, you know, whether it's clothes, whether it's phones, whatever it may be, and they may be asking parents for more, and you know, they're wanting to maybe be a little bit more independent, and with that want, depending on how able the parent is to sort of cater and provide for that, that creates the challenge of, well, I want this, you know, my mum or dad are not able to give it to me, so how else am I sort of able to get it? And whether that's, you know, there's a lot nowadays. It's not just, you know, being on the streets. It's like whether it's like the reselling game, or like or you know, or like refunds and order. There's so much that the young people can do to try and make money, and some of it legal, some of it illegal. But I think year 8, 9 is definitely a pinch point in terms of, you know, even if it's just falling out of interest in education. Like that's the point where they're, you know, potentially about to pick their GCSEs, doing subjects that they think, oh, this is pointless, like, I can't be asked for this. So even if we're not talking about, you know, falling into a world of crime, because not every young person does that, but like it's that why am I even coming to school sort of thing? What do I want to do with myself? Not having any sort of aspiration, or knowing what subjects they want to choose. I think year 8, year 9 is definitely a key point. I think where they're vulnerable.
There's so many, because you can talk about like year 10, year 11, stress of life. But I do think foundations trump everything. And so I guess I'll probably go with that year 6 to year 7 transition, where if you're a young black boy who had a terrible experience in primary school, I think with the right support, targeted support, you can almost restart your schooling career positively. And I've seen that. But I think also if you're a young black boy or girl as well, and you was great in primary school, because secondary school is a different playing field, you do need that support again to either sustain the habits that you're already on, the path, or let's say to further challenge you. Oftentimes people, like, you know, they do tend to like drop off. I've been fortunate enough to kind of work with, you know, this amazing colleague of mine who has this vision of black boys in the library in year 7, right, as opposed to being outside playing football. And he does everything that he can to make sure that happens. And I feel like at the beginning, you know, it was almost like a bizarre thing to kind of like, I'm like, just let them play. But I feel like the point of what he was trying to do was the fact of like making sure like the library isn't an estranged place for them, and that they're not running to it when they get to GCSEs or when it's time to revise, but they actually fall in love with it. And I feel like, imagine if you could sow so many of those small seeds from a young age, it will definitely bud at the right time. So, yeah.
No, that's important. Yeah, that's definitely important. I feel for me, yeah, I agree. I would say that year 6 to year 7 transition is make or break for so many young people. It's like you go into secondary school, no matter who you are, like you're you're trying to establish yourself. That pressure when you come into year 7, oh man, like I've been in their canteen week 1. Oh, who's the fastest in the school? Because everyone's come from 6, 7 different school where you're the fastest and you won, you know, your little year 6 sports day. But now it's like year 7 sports day. Like is like the speed might be different, you know, over here. Footballers and whatever else. And if you've come from all boys school, you're going to so if you've gone from mixed primary school, then you're going to like an all boys school or all girls school. Like there's so many transitions and so many things that, you know, that you need to be mindful of. And I guess, you know, for me, it's about when our young people are going through those transitions that the practitioners, the educators, parents, adults are aware that there is a transition going on.
Yeah.
That there is a change going on.
Yeah.
Because that's the issue sometimes. Like there's that feeling of, oh, we're just streamlined. We're just going from A to B and there's going to be no changes in between. And, you know, I just wanted to quickly and ask, so you guys have been going on for 5 years. What does the future hold for Black Men's Teach? What can we expect in the next 5 years? And we're speaking it into existence because there will be another 5 years.
We actually have we have a meeting later on to kind of discuss that exact same question.
Yeah.
So it's a poignant one. I think it will always come back down to, I joke about it quite a lot, but that there's still that young boy in some next part of the UK that need to know that there's this organisation that's championing them, and we used to laugh about like Shropshire or some next part of London, next part of the UK, sorry, where there isn't that representation. And so I think until, you know, there's almost that highlighting, that spotlighting of Black men teaching those areas, I do feel like we need to continue the work. So that what that looks like is setting up shop in other cities nearby where people can actually like plug into whatever it is that's successfully worked in London. So stepping out of it, I think that's a good thing because we're no longer going to be London centric or London focused. But then also having an aspect of digitalizing certain areas of the work that we do, so that even though we can't physically be there, because both of us are, you know, developing, advancing in our own careers, we still need to make sure the work continues. So if we can digitalize certain aspects of the work that we do, that'll be really, really good. I say grow the team.
Yeah, I'd say like Janoy is very modest in terms of like the way he speaks about certain things. This year has probably been the biggest year for BMT in terms of sort of the programs and workshops delivered in school, particularly the programs. We managed to secure funding, and Janoy's sort of spearheaded that, and that's allowed us to deliver programs across 5 schools over the couple of months and still ongoing. And through that work, it sort of has led to whether it's securing more grants or securing the ability to deliver more programs. And then obviously with that, you know, sort of need to deliver programs, it's expanding sort of our capacity. So Janoy's led some of that himself. He's now built a team of workshop facilitators to go into schools and deliver sort of that programs. And so in terms of the next 5 years, I think that is a massive part of the sort of the BMT work. I think when we first started, it was definitely more educator focused, definitely more thinking about sort of the black male teacher, but then Janoy started speaking about this, what comes first, the chicken and the egg, and sort of the work with young people, and then that's where the workshops came into it. So I definitely think working with young black boys and creating this, we in our mission, it's about creating a school environment where young people can thrive, young black boys can thrive. So I think the programs is definitely a big part of that, and whether it's through funding, whether it's through the various schools that express interest, I think expanding that work is definitely a big a big part of the next couple of years. And then with that, it's looking at our provision for educators. What is the offer? How are we impacting the education space in terms of black men that's in education, black men that want to come into education. So we've spoken with our advisory board about what are we doing in the university space. So that's an area that's to be looked at, and we at the moment we're not doing much there. We've done some small bits of work, but that's an area for definitely the next 5 years. What are we doing in the university space, and how are we engaging with graduates and undergraduates.
Yeah. That's amazing. It's great to hear, and great to see you guys have still got that fire in your belly for the next 5 years. And thank you again for joining the show. It's been a great episode, and I'm sure that the audience will find a lot of our conversations very insightful. So this has been the Too Cool for School podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow us on our social media platforms and subscribe to our YouTube channel.